Welcome to the wonderful world of dance, bringing you exclusive interviews with top dancers and choreographers and reviews of the world's best companies across the globe. You can find lots more on our website at thewonderfulworldofdance.com.
Hi, this is Savannah Saunders, and today I'm thrilled to be talking with choreographer and artistic director Charlotte Spencer, whose work has been said to stretch the definition of choreography almost to its breaking point. Charlotte created her own company, Charlotte Spencer Projects, bringing together a range of artists to create thought-provoking work in diverse and unusual places. Very interested to talk to Charlotte today. Thanks for joining us, Charlotte.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Charlotte, firstly, tell us about your own dance training and what inspired you to start dancing in the first place.
Well, I guess like many young girls, I went to my local ballet school when I was about 3, and I don't think I was very interested in what that was, but I always loved moving. And when I was about 5, my mum took me to a different dance class in our local town, which was a kind of creative dance class that I think didn't really exist in most small villages where I grew up, and I loved it, and I continued to go and be kind of hungry to go. And then later I started to ask to go to the theatre to watch dance, and I think that hooked me in quite tightly. And if I look back at photograph albums of me as a child, then most of the pictures of me from maybe age 6 are like me in our living room or in the garden with a leotard on, trying to persuade my brother and sister to be dancing with me, which they were not very keen on. But I don't think I really considered dance as a career until I was about 16, probably. Mm-hmm. And I think I gradually, maybe other things that I was interested in fell away a little bit, and when other people were starting to think about what they might like to do at university, I realised that I didn't really want to go and study something at a university. I really wanted to be moving and dancing if I could be. So I auditioned and got a place at London Contemporary Dance School in London. And I guess the rest is history in a way. I went straight there when I was 18 and trained for 3 years. And I think I was quite serious, let's say. Like, I was sort of anxious that I wouldn't be good enough, or it would be too intensive or something. But actually I just had the most extraordinary experience there, and it was probably the first time in my life where I felt like I really belonged. It has an extraordinary atmosphere, that building, and I think lots of people feel like it's their second home or their second family. And still, when I go in that building now, I have that sense, even though I graduated a long time ago and my work is not presented in theatres really, and so I don't perform my work there, but I still have this sense of coming home whenever I re-enter that building, and it's quite a special feeling.
And after your dance training, what was your next step in your career after you graduated?
Yeah, I think it was quite a difficult time for me, actually. I really wanted to be performing, mm-hmm. and I did do some performing, but it's hard. It's hard to get work, and it's hard when you're young and you don't have experience to get the experience. And I know lots of young dancers in that very same position. To get your foot in is not straightforward. And I think I lacked a lot of confidence, but I also lacked something of just life experience. I'd gone straight from school to vocational training, and I graduated when I was 20. And I think I was fairly unemployable in a way, even though I had a lot of technique. I didn't have much life outside of like just what my training had been. And I think particularly within contemporary dance, choreographers are looking for for artists to work with. They're not looking for just bodies that can do a load of things. And so it took me some time to find my way.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, amongst that, I did dance various projects for different people. But eventually, 4 years later, I moved to Limerick in Ireland for a year, and I embarked on a year-long residency program where I had access to a studio for 12 months and a small salary, and I shared the studio with 8 other artists, and I feel like that was really when it got going.
And is that when you decided to move into choreography?
Well, I'd sort of dabbled a little bit in the year before that, and that was completely accidental. I think I'd never imagined that I was going to become a choreographer. It wasn't where my interest lay when I was training. I was really convinced that I didn't have any ideas, actually. That I didn't have anything to make or anything to say, and I thought I would be much better suited to realising other people's ideas as a performer. And then in the years after I graduated, while I was still in London, I had a random answer phone message on my phone from a musician who was doing a master's at Guildhall, and she'd been given my phone number by an old choreography teacher of mine from the place, and she was wanting to collaborate with a dancer. And I think she'd called a few people, and I was the first person to get back to her. And so we started making something together, and so I just kind of fell into it because I was hungry to do something, but I didn't really realise how much it would grab me. And I think that first year I got very excited about just the process of what it was to make something. And first of all, we made a duet just between the two of us, and then I made a group piece that was with quite a lot more people, and we started to apply for funding and kind of put on events, and I got really excited about what it was to arrange movement with music in time and space. But I think at that point I didn't really know what I was trying to say. I just knew that I was hungry to explore that realm. And then the year when I was living in Ireland, I think I realised a lot more about what my practice as a maker could be and would be, and where my interests were, and that just the lens through which I looked at the world was a whole wealth of ideas that could sustain me, you know, potentially for the rest of my life. And that was quite an extraordinary sensation, because I feel like the training that I had in my vocational training didn't really teach me to be an artist. I'm not saying it was bad education, but it was it taught me a lot about craft, but it didn't teach me so much about how you foster an idea when it arrives and what you do with that, and how that can start to be invested in maybe really new methodologies for making that are not necessarily recognisable currently. I think from the interactions that I've had with visual artists over the years, that's much more part of visual art training, about how do you work with a concept and create new work from that, and that devising your own methodologies is really paramount. Whereas in the dance training that I had, that was not the focus in a way. So this year in Ireland was really special, and then I came back and I really had a hunger to keep that alive, and the desire to perform in other people's work hadn't disappeared completely, but it was like really in the background.
And is that when you decided to set up your own dance company at around about that time?
Yeah, sort of. That started in the end of 2009, which was about a year after I finished in Ireland. So yeah, they were definitely connected. And initially it was just a way to apply for money, really, that I felt like I needed to have to make a name, but I didn't want to have a company name that was completely dislocated from my own personal name. And and I think by that point I was realising that my interests were not just in working purely with dance, but with other art forms as well. So this is why the name is Charlotte Spencer Projects, not like Charlotte Spencer Dance or something like that. Yeah.
And so your current work has been described, as I mentioned in the intro, as stretching the definition of choreography almost to its breaking point. How would you describe your choreographic language, and what does that really mean?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting challenge to answer in a way, because I think in some respects I just do what I do. I have an idea, or maybe a collection of ideas that I'm trying to explore, and I'm looking for the strongest form in which that occurs. I feel like I stay rooted in the terminology of choreography, because everything comes out of and returns back to the body. Even if what that looks like might be really quite different from maybe traditional dance form. So with the new work that I'm making, the audience are a really sort of essential component. Everyone is wearing headphones and given instructions, and their responses are what makes the work come to life. I mean, there are live performers as well, but they're sort of quite lightly woven through this experience for the performers. And often, in my experience of other sorts of headphone-led performance, I think it's quite rare for that to be devised by someone that comes from a dance background. My experience is that there might be sound artists or performance artists that are experimenting with those sorts of technologies, but it's rare that it comes from someone that has a dance background. And the difference for me is about embodiment. So I'm interested in audiences having headphones and following instructions, because then they are doing the work. They're not watching it.
Yeah.
They are engaged with it physically, and the instructions they hold within them are really detailed and intricate choreography. So it's quite fine in a way, because we're trying to design a physical experience that happens through time and space, and that gives the audience members kind of agency and choice within that. So they might choose how they respond to the instructions that they're giving, but at the same time we're trying to imagine what they might do. And there's quite a lot of geometry, I'd say, and there's quite a lot of sort of intricately designed exchanges between the audience. So what they realise is that they're not all hearing the same thing.
Wow.
And so in this work there's 5 different strands happening simultaneously, and so it might be that one group of people are walking forwards and another are paused and turning, and a circle is being formed by another group, and that means that a fourth group can be making an outer circle around that, or so the interactions between the groups are what creates the choreography in a sense. And I think for people that are totally non-dancers or have no experience of dance, they might not even notice that happening. They might just notice that these patterns emerge across the space and then die away again, and that's all. And for people that maybe have a lot of experience of dance, they see the intricacy that's sort of built in, and maybe that's exciting as well for them. So it's kind of... it's a very interesting process, because we have to imagine it. We can't actually try it until it's being performed. And last week we had a test audience come last Thursday, and it was the first time that we'd had more than sort of 10 people trying something at one time. So we had about 50 people. And so in some ways it was like our preview, and in other ways it felt like the first rehearsal, because it was the first time that we had a sort of mass of people trying to do something that we'd imagined. And it was really fascinating.
Yeah. What was the feedback of the audience the participants, because they're beyond audience at this point, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, they're kind of performers as well. And for me, it was like, I was talking to my producer about it, and she was saying in the car going in, oh, I'm a bit sad because this means we're nearly the end of the process, and I think I prefer the process than the performances. And I said, no, for me, this is the most exciting bit, because I don't know what I've made yet until we see it with people in it, because at the moment I don't even know quite what it is that I've made, which is so extraordinary for a choreographer to not know what they've made until the performance. And we can't even do a dress rehearsal, because the performers, they do different things from what the audience strands that they're kind of accompanying do. So either the performers practice what the strands of material are of the performers, but there will only be one performer in each strand, or the performers do the other stuff, but pretending or imagining what the audience are doing.
Wow.
And so it's quite a big challenge, actually.
I can imagine. I actually also can imagine, and I don't know whether or not this is just because of something I read recently, I can imagine a drone filming it, actually, the entire interaction.
Yeah, I mean, it would be quite extraordinary to do something like that.
Yeah.
Particularly because some of the sort of subject matter of the work is about kind of surveillance and how much we're watched, and what agency do we have in our lives, and what's not. So in a way, a drone would kind of heighten that further in some respects, and that would be quite interesting.
Yeah.
You were asking what the audience response had been, and it was really positive. I mean, what we've realised is that I think we've made something quite wild, which I'm happy about, but I was quite surprised, because the instructions, when you just look at them on paper, and I've been like poring over scripts and exact timings between different things lining up, and how long will it take them to walk from there to there, and then what if there's someone a bit slower, and what about if that person didn't quite hear it, then what would, all of those sorts of things I've been dealing with. So reading the script feels a little bit dry, maybe, and I thought, maybe it's going to feel quite blocky and quite clunky, and maybe it won't hold much feeling of vibrancy and life to itself. But then what you realise is that every single person interprets the instructions they hear differently, and does different things, that some are what you expect and some are completely not what you expect, and that's what makes it extremely beautiful. And that's what is beautiful about life, is that we're not all the same, and that we all have different ways of engaging and responding to everything that happens to us. And this piece somehow like a little microcosm of that. It's sort of like a little slice of the diversity and vibrancy that life is. So actually what came out was a huge range of actions and activities, and some things were really quite unexpected and chaotic, and other things were really sort of tight and formed, and it made me excited. I mean, I feel like we have a little bit of work to do just to tune it a bit more, but people came away kind of really with loads of impressions that happened in their body, like, this moment of confusion where I didn't know where I was meant to be going, and then that was revealed to me what was meant to be happening, and that was really exciting and quite exhilarating, and then suddenly I was like launched into this other thing that I didn't really understand, and then someone took my hand and took me to this other place, and I think what was exciting is, and good reminder, is that because it all happens physically in their bodies, and it's tactile, they're moving things and holding things and touching things and building things, and then they own their experience. They haven't just watched it and gone, that was lovely. It comes right through their bodies, and if I think about the potential of choreography to change us, like as an agent of transformation, then I think this kind of participation really enables that more strongly than other forms that I've found for myself so far. That's not to say it's not possible in other ways, but I think that's how I landed on this way of making for now. That it really comes inside people's bodies more profoundly than other ways that I've experimented with before.
I can imagine, but when you, as an audience member, you often transfer your feelings onto the dancers, or try and you get drawn into the movement. It would be really interesting to experience it being part of that movement. It would just be amazing, I think, as a participant.
Yeah, and I understand that it can also be scary.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to be asked of you, and you think maybe I won't be able to do it, or maybe I'll do it wrong. Or I really recognise that the biggest challenge, people feel like it is for them, and that they don't need some sort of special or expert knowledge to be able to participate. And I really urge people that they don't need any expert knowledge at all. And in many ways, I started to make this kind of work because I was really interested in engaging a much wider audience for dance. Because I guess I was so aware that the audiences that arrive, particularly to contemporary dance work, are quite a narrow group of people.
Yeah.
And often my experience of performing and making work in London was that most of the audience who came were also dancers or makers themselves. And I was a bit frustrated by that, I guess. I was really interested in how can we open up our form, which I find such a beautiful form and such an inspiring and kind of radical form. How can that be opened up to a much wider group of people? And I feel like this work does do that, but it's also a big challenge for people just to step over the line of like, I'm going to embark on this, which I don't know what it is or what's going to be asked of me.
I think it's also a really interesting piece because of the time in which we now live, where social media puts the individual at the centre of our universe, possibly more than we did before. And so it'd be interesting to see how a younger generation would sort of engage with that participation experience, because whether or not they'd be able to record that or share that, or having been almost at the centre of their own experience. Yeah,
I mean, what's interesting is that I'm really clear that I don't want people to have their phone on them during this experience, and sometimes that comes with some resistance. But for me, as soon as someone has a phone with them and is taking pictures of their experience, then they step outside actually of their experience. Yep. And it also distracts other people, because if you know that you're being captured, then you probably behave a little bit differently than if you know that you're not being captured on camera or on film, then, and you're in this wild place because you're in these weird wasteland sites which normally we don't ever go to or even notice. So we're in a kind of weird place doing maybe kind of weird things that we wouldn't normally do, and there's something really liberating about that if you feel like you're not being kind of documented doing those things. What then is really interesting is what people do with social media afterwards, after their experience, because it's so visceral and so physical and so tactile. Then my experience is that if people have kind of had a profound time or have enjoyed the experiences, they really want to share it. Yeah. They really want to talk about it. I mean, people want to talk and talk and talk and talk about it afterwards because it's happened to them. Yeah. And so for me, this is in many ways like the best selling tool. Yeah. This sense of like, I can't tell you what's going to happen, but you should just go because it's just amazing, or something like that. Which we found a lot with my previous work, Walking Stories, that a lot of word of mouth sort of spread between friendship groups and across social media, and it made me want to have much longer runs of performances, which is not always easy programming wise, particularly in dance, because we tend to have one-nighters rather than like, you know, a 3-week run somewhere, which is much more normal within theatre. But when for that work, Walking Stories, we had a 2-week run as part of Dance Umbrella, which is an international festival in London. It happens each October. That was in 2015. And we had 2 or 3 shows a day for 17 days. And so I think we did 36 shows or something like that. Wow. And the word of mouth element of the sales of it really worked well. I think we saw that happening, and the last week was really fully booked with lots of people on waiting lists. So that was quite interesting how that managed to happen. And I would be really interested if that became possible with this project, if we were like, could be at least a week somewhere, and then news can travel, you know, of this unusual and curious event that might be happening locally to where you lived.
Absolutely. I mean, your choreography and the choreographic experience and the participation seems very unique. How have you found your place sort of within the current dance landscape in terms of having your work accepted and celebrated?
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, I feel like since I made quite a bold departure from making more sort of traditional dance work in theatres and galleries towards this sort of very participatory, involved work, I've been much better supported by the dance community. I think for dance, it's exciting and it's new. And so I feel like I've carved a space for myself in some ways that was hard for me to do when I was making work that was maybe more recognisable as something that people have seen before. And so in many ways I feel like I've been pretty well supported. Of course, there's lots of context in which my work does not sit easily, and theatre programmers don't, you know, they don't have a budget often to program work outside of their venue. Yeah. So it's been a journey of finding who the right partners are for the work that I'm making, and often trying to align myself with festivals rather than with venues. But one thing that it doesn't worry me exactly, but I'm kind of keen not to get put in a box for like, oh, she's the artist that makes that kind of work with headphones.
Okay.
Because maybe I don't always want to make work with headphones, and maybe that's okay, you know? So I'm kind of a little bit I don't know, like keen for people to see me as an artist on my own terms, and that those terms might mean that the format of presentation could change a lot. And that I'm not just expected to make a certain kind of work in a certain kind of way. I'm for sure still really interested in how we can move choreographic work beyond the theatre. I think part of the reason I started working outdoors was because I have a long-running love of being outdoors and of being in the natural environment, and I care really passionately about what is happening to our landscapes. And so I think there was a desire from many years ago of how can I invite people to spend more time in the outdoors environment and to have a closer relationship with the outdoors. And for many years I think that was quite separate from my interest in dance, and gradually I start to find ways that they can be brought into the same space. So I continue to be interested in what it offers to take dance outdoors and not just into a town square where essentially you've rehearsed in the studio and then you just perform it in the town square. That's less interesting for me than what if you make work that is designed for outdoors, that you make it outdoors, that you maybe live outdoors in the making of it, that it encourages people to be with their their spaces differently. But that's not to say that I wouldn't ever have an interest in making something for the theatre again. I love going to see work in the theatre. I don't know for sure if I will ever return there with my own work, but I don't want to say no, never. And I also don't want to say no, I'll never make a more sort of traditionally formatted piece of dance work. I don't know.
I mean, your work sounds just so interesting, and I certainly would be the type of person who would definitely want to try it out, participate, put the headphones on, listen to the instructions and fully immerse myself. And I can imagine just so many people being interested in that type of format and how that will engage new audiences and old audiences who view traditional dance and to experience something slightly different, which I think is absolutely amazing. And I just sort of want to ask you one sort of final question, because we've talked a lot on this show recently about the challenges that female choreographers, particularly in the UK, face today. And I know this is such a big topic, we could probably talk forever about it. But I wanted to ask you what advice that you would have for other aspiring female choreographers today to be able to break through as you have in terms of a unique view or a different approach to dance or traditional dance projects. For those listening, any advice?
You're right, I could talk for a long time about this subject, and I think it's very complicated. It's not as straightforward as, female choreographers need to be better represented, or they're not getting the same opportunities as men. I think the challenges come kind of very early in our lives in some ways, to do with how we are, like how genders are just treated differently from early, and a sort of very deeply embedded system that is not equal. However, I heard a really interesting conversation between a female scientist and an interviewer on Radio 4 some years ago, and I'm trying to remember the name of the scientist and I can't, but she was kind of leading in her field, researching into strokes, I think, and the interviewer asked her a little bit along the same lines as you, why do you think that there are so few women in the high echelons within science, and what are the things that get in the way of that, and is there any advice you could give for younger scientists? And she said, well, interestingly, I heard this, she'd read an article that had said that by and large, it's a tendency, but it is a tendency that if a job application comes up and you read through the brief, and if you're a woman and you read through the brief and you think, there's nearly half of those things that are required of me that I don't have experience of, and I probably won't go for the job. Yeah. You give the same job application and brief to a man, they're more likely to look through it and go, I have at least half of those skills and experiences, I'll go for it. And this is a big difference.
Absolutely.
So I would say to young aspiring female choreographers that to go for it, I guess. And I know that I'm definitely in the camp of reading through an application and going, there's nearly half of that I don't have experience of, I won't go for it. But I try and stop myself now and go, well, go for it anyway, and say the things you really have got and the reasons why you're the person for someone to hedge their bets on, because that's how we get experience, by being given the opportunity to get it. It doesn't just happen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such great advice, and it is an extraordinary sort of way of looking at the differences between the genders and how we sometimes hold ourselves back.
So I guess I'm interested in, why is it that I arrive at reading a job application and have that response, and meanwhile I tested it out on my husband. He came back from work and I just heard this radio program, and I said to him, if you were if you saw an application for a job and you only had about half of the skills that they were asking for, would you go for it? And he was like, yeah, every time. I mean, that's how I've got all the work I've got. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, very different. I saw this, there's a couple of things sort of going around on social media. One of them is about the male colleague who took on a female name for a week and experienced what his female colleague went through in terms of dealing with clients and the sexism and, just how they were completely derogative to her. There was that. And then the other day I saw this amazing thing. This couple, these two friends have written a book on positive stories for young girls. So it's like an illustration, and actually Misty Copeland's in there. And it's to offset or to be the antithesis of the fairy tale, where it's actually a book full of actual stories about actual women who have achieved amazing things. And it's a very thick book, and it's done for written and illustrated for young children, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, thank you. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today, Charlotte. And for listeners who want to get outdoors and put on a pair of headphones and experience a completely unique performance, the production is called Is This a Wasteland? And is coming up at the Our Woods Festival. And you can book your tickets and learn more about Charlotte and Charlotte Spencer Projects at charlottespencerprojects.org. Thank you so much, Charlotte.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Don't forget to subscribe. We've got some incredible interviews coming up with principal ballerinas and renowned choreographers. We love dance and ballet, and we hope you'll love us. Join us on Facebook and Twitter.